Hello and welcome back to More Than a Lumpy Jumper. Conversations on leadership, life and lessons learned, often the hard way. This week, Bridge and I are joined by another guest, Daniele Fiandaca, for our celebratory episode for International Men's Day. Daniele's ultimate aim is to inspire every man to become a more inclusive leader, a far better ally to inclusion and diversity, and ultimately an agent of change, creating workplaces that are truly inclusive, equitable and diverse. For this to be more of a reality, we are back to kindness, compassion and real conversations. So please come and join us to explore what all this could mean in practice in a conversation about being compassionate with men.
Hi, and welcome back to More Than a Lumpy Jumper. Daniele, I'm so pleased that you could join us both for this celebration and really paying attention to International Men's Day, because I guess that we spend a lot of time banging on about International Women's Day, and often International Men's Day gets a little bit forgotten about, and we're going to try and change that.
I mean, if I was given £1 for every time someone said, "Oh, International Men's Day, isn't it Men's Day every day?" I'd be a very rich man.
And so normally we invite our guests to introduce themselves as they would like to be introduced. But I just wanted to, in terms of International Men's Day, now we had this when we were doing the International Women's Day episode, and there seem to be various different themes, and we can never as to what the theme is. And for International Women's Day, it turns into a bit of a spat. But what is your understanding of the theme for this year's International Men's Day?
To be honest, I go with the UK site, so I don't actually go with the US site. So I always go with the UK site, and it is the same every year. So fundamentally, I don't think it needs a theme. It's the thing I would say is fundamentally right now it's still quite young. You know, I still work with some businesses who are marking it for the first year. It's interesting. I don't talk about celebrating it. I talk about marking it rather than celebrating it. I think we should celebrate men, but that's not really why International Men's Day is there. So International Men's Day is there just to recognise the challenges that boys and men face and bring those to the forefront. It's also about raising money for those amazing charities that are doing great work to supporting men. And so I focus around those things really. And so for me, when I work with my clients is we work out what theme we think is going to best connect with men, because that's fundamentally what we need to be doing. Is we need to be using this opportunity to bring men in the room and show that they're supported, because more often than not, when it comes to inclusion and diversity, a lot of men, especially ones that look like me, so white, straight, neurotypical men without disabilities, are completely lost and forgotten when it comes to getting support. And I think that's creating real problems within organisations.
Yeah. So I'll move back to inviting you to introduce yourself. But Daniele, thank you for coming, and just tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and why you do what you do.
So I'm a consultant. I run Token Man Consulting. So I do two things fundamentally. Half my time I spend doing inclusive leadership, so working with leaders, helping them become more inclusive. And the other half of the time I'm working with companies to help them better engage their men with inclusion and diversity. So that means supporting those men, inspiring those men, and when they're ready, recruiting them to become better allies and agents of change. I'm also co-founder of Masculinity in the Workplace. It's the only inclusion and diversity event that is designed specifically to engage with men that look like me and have experiences like me. It's actually on International Men's Day. I can't wait. It's one of my highlights of the year. And probably the third thing is probably worth saying, I'm also co-founder of an initiative called Hard as Nails, which is about getting men, you can't see them, but you two can see my lovely silver nails, but it's getting men to paint their nails to open up conversations around masculinity and mental health.
Thanks, Daniele.
Oh, you can imagine just where my head is going now to just try to convince my husband to do that immediately on hearing this recording. I can't wait. Oh, The
Do you know what?
mischief in me.
It's been so amazing. The men that work, so we're in beta at the moment, so we're testing, we're trying to get research, we're trying to prove before we get funding for hopefully what will be a national campaign. We're doing beta tests, and it's just so wonderful because I've got them all in a WhatsApp group, and I would say that over 50% now just do it regularly.
Mm.
It's just become a
I,
thing for them, and it just is so. I feel slightly naked when I haven't got them on, and also when I see people who kind of follow me on LinkedIn, know me, and the first thing they'll do is they'll look at my hands. If they're not painted, they'll just be disappointed.
I think back, it's quite interesting, and I don't know if this is how you can convince people to even do it. But when I'm thinking about chuckling with my husband doing it now, aged 60 plus, you know, when our daughter, who's now in her 20s, was very young, it was normally daddy that sat down to have his nails painted and his hair done
Yeah.
because mummy was far too busy rushing around doing everything else and didn't want her hair pulled. If I, sorry, Ella, I'm really sorry, Ella, but you were terrible at brushing hair. Whereas on short hair, he had bobbles and sparkles and his nails painted and everything else besides. What is the way to attract them into doing such a thing? I mean, we're down a rabbit hole already, but it's just interesting to think about what fathers may well do and then what they wouldn't necessarily do at a later date, or just a men in general with their nails.
Yeah, no, listen. I am, as part of what I'm doing is I am trying to break stereotypes, and I'm doing that either personally or highlighting people that are breaking stereotypes. I'm going to be wearing a skirt on International Men's Day on the stage. And some people will find that uncomfortable, and some people will find that a bit weird. And actually, my wife, while she's really embraced the nails, and she's kind of my stylist, so it's been her job to find me my skirt. She's really struggled with it actually because we've talked about it, and she's struggled it because she's worried for my safety.
Wow.
There's a yeah,
Yeah.
there's an element of it. So it's not a how you look. It's actually we did it once when I was away with my friends at Easter, and she just really felt it. And the fact that that even is a concern just shows you why we have to change the current narratives. We have to change the current systems.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Danielle, so one of the themes that I've seen, or the sort of concepts that International Men's Day focuses on, but I think in a way you focus on throughout the year, is this idea about men's mental health and the need for compassion for men. And I just wondered how that lands with many other people. Do you get pushback? Because obviously I know that sometimes the feeling is, for God's sake, what the hell? Why do men need compassion? They have all the power. And that, that can make women quite angry, I think, having that discussion. And I just wondered how you are approaching it and how you're finding it.
Well, I do lots of collaborations. So I run something called Together Spaces. I did my second Together Space with Lisa Barnwell on
Yeah.
compassion for men, and I know Lisa got quite a lot of pushback from
Oh,
women
did
saying,
she?
"Why are you
Oh,
doing a session around compassion for men?" Which in itself is just startling, right? So
yeah.
I think that the reality is this: men are human beings like anyone else. So, and also, what's really interesting for me when people say men, especially in the work context, people think of people like me, right? So white, straight, neurotypical men without disabilities. Firstly, men are intersectional, right? A black man
Yeah.
is still a man. Uh, a man with disabilities is still a man. So, that's why, when I hear that phrase, oh, isn't it Men's Day every day? I actually find it quite insulting now because you're just not really considering the fact that men are human beings. They need support, and actually, they come in all different shapes and sizes, and everyone needs support. And also, that's why I don't like when people bandy around male privilege or female
Mm,
privilege. Yes, men have privilege in certain circumstances, but there are other rooms where there's female privilege. So if
Yeah.
I'm a father standing in a courtroom going through custody, we know who's got the privilege in that room, and it's definitely not the father. And we're seeing huge issues with fathers losing access to their children,
Mm.
which is so sad because men have such a important role, I think, in terms of being father figures, and especially, I mean, boys and girls, but I lost my brother 12 years ago. I know my nephew Luca hasn't had that father figure, and nor has Chloe, and that makes me sad. But I have to say, their mum's done such a wonderful job. So it is okay. You can get through it. But I think ultimately, I mean, I'm gonna very briefly, but I had real mental health issues 2.5 years ago, and without going into it too much detail, some of the people around me who should have known better and who I told decided not to help me because I'm a white, straight, neurotypical man without disabilities.
Wow.
Yeah, and we're seeing that time and time again. I don't want to jump straight to, because this isn't about, listen, the suicide stats are horrific.
Yeah.
A man takes his own life in the UK every 90 minutes. It is really scary. But it's so many men are suffering, so many men are struggling. If we look at the context of the world and how it's shifting and how quickly it's shifting, whereas while men are rightly being asked to take much more responsibility at home, that's actually how we create gender equity in the workplace, is allowing men to take more time at home, spending more time with their kids, which actually ultimately benefits them, benefits their kids, benefits everyone. So we think about men, as fathers, I think, and again, I'm not a father, but, we have got so many fathers in the workplace, is, taking that load at home is something they need to do. It's how it helps gender pay gap. It's how it helps women, obviously in heterosexual relationships. It also helps, a lot of studies shows it will help men themselves. It will help the children. But at the same time, what we've also got is we've still got the societal pressure that men still feel to be the breadwinner.
Yeah.
And that is real, and sometimes it is not logical. Sometimes a man might be earning exactly the same as his female partner, but yet feels this burden that it's just been inbuilt with us. I feel it, and the reality is that dual pressures are causing huge mental health issues, as is the cost of living crisis. We're doing a study at the moment, the malownership study. I'm going to give you a slight insight
Ooh.
into it.
Oh, I love these.
But the biggest fear for men is not being able to provide for their family. That's
Yeah.
it.
Daniel, I'm absolutely with you on this, but I also think there's an element, isn't there, that many women have this internalized patriarchy, misogyny too. So even when they are saying, oh, we want equal, men should allow us to do this, we want to have equity, but the moment that men step back or give them space and say, yeah, okay, I'm going to stay at home and look after the kids to allow your career to take off, that there are many women who judge men for that, who judge men for not living up to that. I know that I have male friends who have said that they've tried really hard they've done everything they thought they were supposed to do, and then suddenly women around them are going, oh, but you're not very masculine anymore, are you? There's something a bit weird about that. And I think that so I don't think it's just men's
You're
needs.
right.
Could I just add to that as well? There is the male being judged in a bit, in my experience and conversations I've had, in a wider network, but the men being judged for taking the step back and suddenly women not liking it. The other reason they don't like it is all of a sudden they've been given everything they've been asking for, to be the biggest breadwinner, and then they don't want it.
Yeah.
So I mean, Bridget, often be saying about people need to be careful what they wish for, but and Danielle, I'm sure that you're in this. I'd hope that with what you've been saying, it's where is the balance that there's space for all of that to be interchangeable. I feel like I've been the luckiest woman alive with my husband of 20 plus years, where we've changed gears every now and again, where I've had to spend more time or we've balanced things out. I think that, so I feel lucky like that. But I also feel lucky because of the environments we were working in, that could be done. And I think that whilst there are many men wanting to do that now, and it's interesting that we say taking a back seat. It's not taking a back seat. It's just doing something a bit different within the to-do list element to it. But it's whether organisations are really ready to have men doing that part of family life well, without continually adding the pressure to them of the expectations with what's still expected in the workplace. Because I've seen personal experience from family and from our wider friendship group when the pressure is more from a mental perspective for men, because they're trying to do that and they're still trying to do God knows what at work.
And it's really interesting you talk about that. Be careful what you wish for. So, firstly, we had Susie Orbach at Masculine in the Workplace last year, and she said the phrase that stuck with me the most, because actually I do see it a lot in the workplace with male leaders. And she fundamentally said, I see too many male leaders on stilts who are hollow inside.
Mm.
I know.
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
And she's right, because
Wow.
what happens is people get to the apex of their career and they realise they've spent their time in the wrong place. If you think your career is more important than family or friends, I feel really sorry for you, because it just isn't. Your career is what helps you get that quality time. But I think a lot of people lose sight of that. Your family and your friends and that sense of belonging and that sense of purpose is so much more important than your career. And listen, I'm sitting from a position of privilege. I've done very well in my life. I've sold 2 businesses. So, it's much easier for me to say, but I do see it time and time again as people think that's what I'm going to aim for. They get there and they go, and that time that they didn't spend with their kids is gone. It's literally got, they can't claw that back. There's a scary stat, actually. I always tell parents this as a way of just making sure they take the full opportunity they have with their children, which is, I think it's something like, once your children have hit 18, you have spent, on average, 94% of the time you'll ever spend with them in their lifetime.
Mm.
So, if you don't spend it there, so you think that father who's been absent because they've been at work the whole time has missed all those years, they've got 6% left.
I think that is a very good stat to actually be telling fathers and mothers.
Yeah.
Because I think with having become senior quite quickly when our youngest was much younger, I was susceptible to hollow legs because of being ambitious, and I can see that in this era now, that what you wouldn't want to see happen is that same statement being made about female leaders in the future.
100%. And it's that careful what you wish for. I think Maya Angelou, and it's a cartoon, I've been trying to find it, I don't think I can find it, but Maya Angelou, the wonderful feminist who wrote the incredible book The Will to Change, and many other books, but it was a cartoon that was created, and basically it was a medium, and it was something like at 2:00, all women want men to express their feelings, so it will happen at 2:00 tomorrow. And then it says something like, the medium says at 2:00 tomorrow, every single woman will ask men to shut up. Because actually, again, you can't do this work without generalizing. It's hard to generalize, and everyone is different. But we do know that men have become disconnected with their feelings, and they're not comfortable opening up and talking about those feelings. And so a lot of the work I do actually is just reconnecting men with those feelings, get them to be more comfortable with just talking about how they're feeling, talking to their friends. I think, if I look at my journey, and I've been on a massive journey, but I think my journey, probably when I realized that I'd changed forever, was probably, I'm just trying to work out, it was 4 or 5 years ago. I went out with two of my best friends, and we all happen to be Arsenal fans, and we sat down and for an hour of the dinner, we talked about stuff that mattered. We talked about our parents, we talked about Alzheimer's, we talked about grief, we talked about our families. Then for an hour we talked about rubbish, the stuff that bonds us. There still was that element of the stuff that bonds us. And then we got to the end of the 2 hours. We just got a new manager. We hadn't even talked about Arsenal.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
I think that's the right place to be. My husband being a Tottenham fan, just saying.
Oh, I feel sorry for him. That's all I'm going to say.
Good job we watch more rugby than football, so all is well with the world.
Daniele, though, so that was a turning point for you to realize that you could have that sort of amazing. Those just, well, I mean, sort of call it amazing, but it's not amazing, is it? It's normal to have those sort of conversations about real things, important things, emotions and vulnerabilities and worries. And I guess that one of the issues with men's mental health is that generally within this patriarchal society, this society that says men have to be the strong ones, they have to be the leaders, they have to be the head of the family and the breadwinner and hold everything together, it doesn't give them permission to be vulnerable. So even though they may have these connections with other men, those connections generally, and again we're generalizing, tend to be more about the let's talk about football, let's not talk about things that are worrying me and that I'm scared of, things that aren't going well. Whereas women generally have had, in our society, generally are able to do that much more. And I wonder how you approach that, how you start to give permission to the men that you work with to do that opening up.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to role model it. So fundamentally, you have to role model it. So, it's really interesting. I can tell you quite a few. Firstly, you have to start with yourself. So, I remember about, again, it's probably about 3-4 years ago, sitting down with one other set of mates and telling them I was in therapy, and it was like tumbleweed just went across the table. No one answered, no one said anything, no one even said, "Are you okay?" And actually, let's be really clear: just coming to therapy doesn't mean I'm not okay. Actually, if anything, it means I am okay. It means I recognise that that therapy is just part of your mental health and how you support that mental health. But they just didn't have the tools to be able to say anything. But what was interesting is one of them reached out to me not long afterwards and just said, "Oh, one of our friends, I think he's really struggling at the moment. Do you mind checking in with him?" So all of a sudden they were pulling. They didn't have the tools, but they knew that person needed that support, which is absolutely fine. And maybe next
That's
time
a
they'll.
start.
Yeah, it's definitely a start. And I think for me, I've got another group of friends. We've started going out, and I started talking about the menopause and the challenges it's had for me and my wife, and and their conversations that they never had before. And what they did is they then went home and they started talking to their partners about the menopause. They wouldn't have had those conversations otherwise. And I think so. The conversation I have probably the most is about losing my brother. I'll tend to do it on stage. It will tend to be in tears. And the reason I do it is I'm emotionally drained after it. I can do it. I have gone through grief, so it's not a trigger for me, but it's still emotionally draining. But the reason I do it is because last year, a dad came up to me. He said, "I lost my dad 2 weeks ago. When I started crying, I hid it from my kids. I've now realised that was a mistake. I'm going to go back tonight and I'm going to tell them I cried, and it's okay to cry, and that's just part of emotions." And so for me, that allowed him to realise that kind of that pressure that the system puts on us, and it is the system that puts us on us, caused a lot of harm. That's all those things about strength and men have to be strong.
Yeah.
That was for when we were hunter gatherers. I mean, it's it goes back to when men did need to be strong because they needed to protect. Right? There was it was the men had to be there and protect. But someone was saying to me the other day, masculinity is about being strong. I'm like, what's why? I just don't understand. Why do men have to be stronger than women? They don't. The reality is, we have a hormone that means that often leads to us building muscle more. But why do we need to that? Why do we need to that to be a man? I just don't understand it.
I think that, and it's our connotation of the word strength when we think about physicality rather than necessarily about mentally or bodily from the emotion perspective. Because if I think about strength that you think about, strength that you are from a body, or strength that you have within your set of emotions, they're all very different. And things that I've read about is that within all of us, there is a proportion of masculine energy and female energy, whatever gender we actually are. But whilst we think about strength in that way, and it being very much just a masculine energy or physicality. That's not true, is it? Because if you think about strength in different ways, it has as much of a female in it, but we don't necessarily think about it like that.
Firstly, thank you. I mean, I do talk about historical masculine traits and historical feminine traits in the work we do. I think it's really interesting when we start thinking about leadership, especially with male leaders who aren't, and I hate to say it, but there just aren't enough male leaders leaning into inclusive leadership. But the reality is those people are, I was speaking to a friend of mine who's a coach, and, he said it brilliantly. He said he fears for men. He fears for men because they're going to wake up one day and they're going to really realize they've become irrelevant. And that's because they haven't developed the skills that are needed for the future. So Dr. Michelle King did a piece of research where she asked CEOs, and it was a significant number of CEOs, what are the skills that are needed now and what skills in the future? And they ranked them. So there were 10 different skills, they ranked them. And then she took the skills, so there were 5 top skills for the future. And then what she did is she asked those CEOs, generally, what skills are men good at and what skills are women good at? This is good news for the women listening to this. Of the 5 top skills, 4 intersected with what women were good at. Only 1 intersected with what men were good at.
Daniela, I was going to say, I had come across a similar statements in terms of the response to so many men who are railing against the fact that now it's very hard to get promoted if you're a white cis male. This sort of horrible concept of the words, the phrases people start using is, oh well, we're getting rid of the white, pale and stale, and they're rebelling or feeling threatened by that. And a lot of men, particularly in places that I've worked, have said, oh, it's impossible to get promoted now. You can only get promoted if you're a woman. And actually the response I heard, which I really thought was quite, well, it aligns with what you're saying. And it was, look, you're right. There are a number of men who are not going to move into leadership roles who might have done so historically. But the ones who will are the ones who are adapting to the needs of the modern leadership role and are fine-tuning the skills that are now needed, because the old style of leadership is no longer the type of leadership that we want in the future. And so, yeah, if you as a white male wants to get promoted and wants to be relevant, then you have to adapt. You have to adapt. And the skills that you're talking about, that those sort of more open, vulnerability, authenticity, collaboration, communication, all of those skill sets that weren't traditionally viewed as leadership, they were called soft skills, which annoys me a lot because they're hard to do properly. I think is the answer is to say, look, yeah, everybody's having to change. And I do wonder about sort of this sticking to this patriarchal type of leadership, because you talked about this hollow inside and leaders who are trying to do everything. But many women who get into leadership roles have had to fit into the patriarchal role.
Yep.
And they also, as you said, Bobby, are going to end up hollow inside because they're having to suppress who they are, what they are,
Yep.
get rid of a lot of the skills that they might have had and try and ape that sort of strength, rigidity, sort of slightly dictatorial, all-knowing, exhausting type of leadership. So yeah, I sort of had heard very similar things to what you're saying, Daniela.
Yeah, and I say the same. Listen, I say the same thing. So, firstly, I feel with those men is the first thing, and which people. And when I say that, I can see, I know because I've done it in rooms. All the women roll their eyes, and you're like, well, that's just it's like that's just a normal empathetic human reaction, because the reality is their chances have gone down. And sitting here now at my time in my career, I was really clear what I was going to be doing at this point in my career. I'd be doing cushy non-exec jobs. I can't get a non-exec role now because I'm a white, straight, neurotypical man without disabilities. It is much harder. If in fact, I spoke to one guy. He just found it. He actually found it impossible, and he ended up just taking a non-paid for trustee work. So it has shifted. But I could sit there and moan about it, but that's not going to help me. is what you have to do is, if you're not leaning in, you are going to be in trouble. That's the reality. However, now this is the however. In the short term, the problem is, I would love to say all companies are doing this right and they are understanding and they're embracing inclusivity, but let's be really clear. I think it's a
We haven't
minority that
scratched the
are.
surface yet.
We
Yeah.
haven't scratched the
Yeah.
surface. And the reality is, right now, I don't know of a single business that is not promoting non-inclusive people. Because the minute you stop promoting, if you only promote people who are inclusive, everything changes. But I'm telling you now, there is going to be a shift, because inclusion, come on, who doesn't want to have inclusive leadership within their business? At least the better results, at least the better diversity, which gives you the better solutions. People feel included. People actually want to be part of that team. The skills that we're talking about are skills that are are positive for us as human beings. There will be a shift, and those that haven't been working on them will be left cold. Absolutely cold.
Can I explore, which is probably going to pop out a bit like a half-baked cookie, because I'm not quite sure whether I've got it honed yet with the way that I want to say it, but if you can just bear with me. So a lot of my coaching work is done in the somatic space, that's bodily energy, which talks about how people have been shaped. So we're talking a lot about how people have grown up in organisations and quite what the leadership style has looked like. And I know that although we're not doing themes for International Men's Day, I saw the theme around role modelling, and we're talking about role modelling and what needs to be role modelled. So a lot of people moving into leadership roles haven't got a good expanse of role models to actually look at. So there's a shape. And then if we move back through school and we move back into how people have been parented, etc., boys have been parented in a particular way. And again, we're talking mass generalizations and the stereotypical. But Bridge, I think you used the words, we have to change. They have to change. Yeah, they do. Have they got any idea how to? Because this shaping is inbuilt in them from a very, very long time. And if we're also talking about mental health, putting somebody into a space where they are going to be required to be vulnerable in order to see and to gain awareness of where they need to change. They're going to be made to feel wholly uncomfortable. And in order to do that, I mean, Daniela, you've talked about being in therapy. I've done my own development as well. You have to have support mechanisms around there for that to be able to be sustainable change and not putting yourself at more risk whilst you're actually doing that. So I guess I'm left with the thought that this is an inordinate ask when you look at all of that shaping, and organisations aren't doing that. To thank God we've got people like yourself who are doing these things and creating different places for people to bring that part of themselves out. But we have got a way to go for that shaping to be broken and for something else to take root. Just one final thought. It will not be helped by female shaping rolling their eyes, not thinking that white men of a particular age and a particular sexual orientation and everything else beside still need to be included. We can't be talking about inclusivity without including everybody.
Yeah, and also just to pick up on Bridget's question earlier, that's why compassion for men is so important.
Yeah.
Because the journey that we're asking people to go on is really hard because of everything you've talked about. So I've been on that journey for 10 years. And let's be really clear, I've spent 7 years in the inclusion and diversity space. I do this every day, but it's so hard. So the one thing, when I left my previous business 2 years ago, the first thing I did is train to become a coach, because I knew that coaching was going to be a key part of creating that shift. I mean, today I'm really excited. I've got my second cohort, my male allyship group coaching program launching today. So 12 men, 14 weeks, 7 sessions. And the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to get them to look at the feelings wheel and, choose a feeling, put them into pairs and get them to speak about their feelings. These journeys take a long time, and I sometimes go into businesses and they go, we want an inclusive leadership course that lasts a day. And I'm like, I'm not going to give you an inclusive leadership course that lasts a day because that's pointless. Oh, but there are other providers that do it in a day. I said, well, use those other providers, but they're not fit for purpose. So, our inclusive leadership programs are 6 to 9 months and they usually incorporate coaching because the reality is the journey that people need to go on is significant. And I know you talked about, shaping, and, we do know that boys are really struggling in schools right now. And if we start talking about that shaping, I think something like, and I'm going to get the stats slightly wrong. Sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's something like primary school down, there's only 6% of male teachers. It is a shocking figure. And so when you think about those role models, who, those boys, who are they looking up to? They're just seeing women in caring roles, right? So all of a sudden, guess what? They're not seeing themselves in those roles, and they're also not seeing people like them that can connect with them. So, and again, I'm quite clear. I've recommended to friends, I would only get a male therapist. There's no way I'd get a female therapist just because I feel that connection. So there are things that I think you just need connection with. And it's funny, a friend of mine, he did actually get a female therapist. And I said, oh, really? And actually the female therapist after 4 sessions said, I think you might need to swap to a male therapist after this. Because there were just, because there were just certain things you can, and don't get me wrong, I'd take a female coach any day. And me and my wife have done couples counselling. And in that particular case, actually a therapist, a woman. And actually, I don't think I'd want a male therapist in that case. Maybe that's my own prejudices as well coming through. But I think the reality of those boys not seeing someone that looks like them, I think is having a negative impact on them.
And I think that such a great word to be using in all of that is connections, because it is, because I meant to ask way back when you were talking about having that type of conversation with your friends before the footy match. But the reason that you can end up in a space like that is because of the connection that may well have started from football or from whatever else it might be, to be in that safe space. I did just wonder, because it was life affirming for you that day. Did any of you mention it afterwards, or was it just a moment in time?
I think it's just a moment in time. Yeah, I think when it comes down to, with my friends, I do a lot of stuff, but even just the little things like I tell my friends at least twice a year. I'll send them a little message telling them I love them, and that's become regular now, and that's just baked in. Funny enough, I tend to use my work to do it. So I'm lucky, right? I know what needs to shift. If I think something needs to shift, I role model it. So if I'm writing a post about men needing to tell each other they love each other more, it forces me to do something that actually hasn't been natural in my life. I think it probably took me probably only the last 10 years I've told my dad I love him. For that just wasn't natural. It wasn't baked in, but now it's baked in. It just becomes natural, and I think that's really nice. And then it also connects you with people. What's really interesting for me is it just connects you with people that already have that baked in, because they will say it back to you straight away. Love you, and you're like, oh, we've only known each other for a year, but that's such a lovely thing to say. And so, I think for me, it opens up so many doors.
I love baked in, because I say embodied. It's all about practice. And you saying you've been on this journey for 10 years. I absolutely hear you, because it's the practice of doing things again and again. And I just wanted to say that out loud, because that's what we're asking everyone to do, is to practice different things. But you only get to embody it and to be it the more you do it. And that's what you're caveating there as well. So thank you for that.
Daniela, Bobby was talking about the support that's needed for this sort of fairly fundamental change, to be able to practice, to be able to learn, to be able to finally bake it in. And I just wondered whether you wanted to talk a little bit about Brave Spaces, the space that you provide. And I know you do all kinds of other things. I haven't attended Brave Spaces because it's male only, right? But I've attended some of the other workshops that you've done where you've been collaborating with other people, particularly women, to have some difficult conversations and really interesting conversations. But I wondered about Brave Spaces and this idea of the support that's needed, that it's not just, as you say, you just kind of point at it and go, yeah, okay, we're going to get men to be more vulnerable.
Yeah, Brave Spaces actually was inspired by a discussion on LinkedIn, funny enough. it was Josh. I can't remember Josh's surname, but he came up with the term brave spaces. So there was a conversation around whether safe spaces for men was the wrong word. So I had a real pushback for saying safe spaces, and I don't totally agree with the person's point. I still think, if you think about men, I talked about the biggest fears they have. Saying the wrong thing is actually their second biggest fear right now, and there are consequences. I think for me there are
Yeah.
consequences if someone says the wrong thing in the workplace. It came from the fact that one of the things we talk about in inclusion diversity is you have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. What I know with certainty is that when you spend most of your career, so until I was 39, I'd never experienced being in the out group. So when you're in group the whole time, you don't have to have uncomfortable conversations. So the reality is, whereas it's a lived experience for many women and historically marginalized groups who have to have uncomfortable conversations regularly, part of our privilege means we don't need to have those uncomfortable conversations. So what happens is, if you put someone in the space and you say, there you go, be comfortable with being uncomfortable, they don't have the skills for it. And so what
No.
happens is, and I have seen men leaning into inclusion diversity and then saying the wrong thing, and then having people either eyes rolling or people just angrily
Yeah.
picking them up. And guess what? They walk back out.
Shut down.
Yeah.
They shut down and they don't come back in. And you're like, you've just lost that person. And you think you've been really clever because you've made someone feel smaller. You've made someone, you created a moment of shame and you feel, wow, look what I've done. And you're like, no, you haven't. You've just taken that person out of the journey. And so for me, Brave Spaces was really initially about creating more uncomfortable conversations. And I just did it as a test, to be honest. I do a lot of free stuff with the Token Man. So I've got my model, which isn't necessarily working at the moment financially, but my model is hopefully to spend 50% of my time doing free work, which is Token Man, and 50% paid for work, which is Token Man Consulting. So I do a lot of free stuff. Brave Spaces was just another addition, but it's just turned into a beautiful way of just getting men to talk about things that really matter so far. And I suppose the challenge, and this is the biggest challenge, is I still haven't filled up a single Brave Space, and it's only 16 people. So even though they're free, even though I have this network, and I'm going to talk about in a minute what women can do, because I actually, for me, it's very frustrating because whenever I put something on LinkedIn that's maybe talking about the challenges women face, and we all have this issue, the men in this space, is all the women love our posts. Yeah, they just like. If I talk about issues around men, women just ignore them. And I'm like going, okay, but you're 90% of my LinkedIn base. By ignoring it, it doesn't go into the feed, which means no men see it, which means we don't create change. And I had this conversation. So, yeah, but the last thing I need is to promote another man. You're like, you're not promoting another man. People see it so binary. Was actually what we're trying to do to create change. But coming back to Brave Space, I've done the one coming up. I'll put some more up by the time this podcast is live. But I'm about to do Navigating Grief. I've done sex and intimacy. I've done how can you ask for help. I've talked about vulnerability. I've done one around men's changing role in society, how you're feeling about leaning into inclusion and diversity. I've done one on childlessness. So, childlessness was the one that I knew but I got 2 people and we had an amazing conversation. It just happened that of those 2 people, one of them wasn't childless and was coming in to be a better ally to someone else. So
that's so lovely.
That's so brilliant.
Exactly. It's so lovely, but it just meant I had to
Yay
redesign
him.
it. It stopped becoming a coaching session, and actually I became part of the session because I am childless. So actually he got to hear the conversation I had with the other person who's actually trying. He was talking about what he's going through in not having a partner, wanting kids, and struggling with that. But we're having amazing conversations, and I'm sure the one on Navigating Grief will have again incredible conversations.
Right, well, note to self, I will be promoting that. There is my commitment here on the podcast. It's a bit like you saying about how much you find that you learn from and what you then commit to. Bridge and I, in our research for each of the different recordings, find ourselves doing new things, which is all to the good. So I love hearing about that. Thank you for sharing that.
I think the thing to say is the only way we're going to create change is together. There are some really amazing men, people like Robert Baker, Lee Champions, Seb Randall, there's Sal Nassim. There are amazing men you should be following, and actually anything they do that is about talking to a male audience, like it, share it, because the way the algorithm works, unfortunately, the people that follow us the most are women. So if the women who follow us don't like it, it doesn't go into the feeds. And so we don't get that message out. So I think for me, understanding that ecosystem is really important and how we can actually create that shift, because ultimately we're only going to create change together.
Danielle, I was going to ask you sort of 3 pieces of advice for women to support men to be allies, other than obviously this idea of sharing information that men are generating for other men.
I think it was so lovely. We had one call on friendship, and this woman came on, and she was so worried about her partner, and she was coming on to try and get ideas because she could tell her partner was feeling lonely. And I was like, oh my God, I was like, so wonderful. And she was so vocal. And I was like, but is that the right way of doing it? I wasn't sure that was the right way of doing it. So I think for me, firstly, sit down and try and have those conversations. You know, they can be comfortable, they can be uncomfortable. Ask questions like, friendship groups, ask questions about how you feeling and how you really feeling. You know, get out. My wife said to be honest, my wife, because we both work in the same space, my wife for ages says, I need to get the feelings wheel out for you. You know, she kept on saying it. What she should have done is, rather than saying it, she should have got the feelings wheel out. I mean, yeah, no, seriously. I mean, the first time I actually used the feelings wheel was Josh Connolly at his brilliant Uncommon Man London, which he does with Rob Smith in Liverpool Street. So, you know, I get to go, and I haven't been for a while. I'll book it before the end of the year. But, you know, I get to spend, it's the first Tuesday every month, and it's for 2 hours, and it gets 30 men. And for the first hour, they do different exercises. Particular exercise, they just put the feelings wheel up and got us to choose our feelings, put some small groups, discuss those feelings. And now I've integrated that into everything I do. All the men's work I do starts with the feelings wheel. And the second half, he does breath work, which is all about helping you release some of that pent-up energy that you have, that negative energy. And it's quite funny, you know, you start to hear these stories from these other men. And what one person said, he said, oh yeah, I'm back this month. I think I got the hint when my wife said, you haven't been to Uncommon Man London recently, have you? Because it just shows, she just saw the positive impact, right? And so I think for me, is finding stuff. And that sometimes might be doing it with them, just find other ways. And also, you know, try and find different language. So I interviewed for International Men's Day, I interviewed James from Sanctus, and he was talking about how he really struggled with his friends to talk about mental health, even though he was running a mental health business. You know, whenever he said mental health, they switched off. And this only happened a month before we did the podcast, and he was starting to realise that he started to say, my batteries are dead. My batteries are dead. And then he'd explain why his batteries are dead. So he'll talk about what the root of that was. And then he started noticing his friends saying, my batteries are dead. And what that did is then gave him permission just to ask questions to get behind what the root of it. So what was in the way there was mental health. There's actually a post I've been meaning to do forever, but there's a lovely McDonald's ad. I really liked it, actually. I think it was World Mental Health Day, and it's a little girl saying, I'm feeling a bit wibbly. And I just thought it's just different language that allows people the opportunity to have conversations. So I think for me, have the conversations. And actually, you know, listen, I'm not a marriage guidance counsellor. You know, I have a wonderful marriage. I'm very lucky. Tina's amazing. I'm massively into film. I've just come off 10 films in the last 12 days, London Film Festival. Go and see Emilia Perez. It's an amazing film. But I always say to couples, watch Marriage Story. Please watch Marriage Story, because that is a brilliant example of how communication leads to breakdown. Miscommunication and lack of communication.
Wow. Thanks, Daniela. There's one final question, and because we are getting very close to our time, I mean, just has flown, and I would love to continue to have this conversation, but advice for leaders in terms of the support that's needed. So male or female leaders, if you're in a leadership role, Have you got any advice for them?
So listen, it doesn't matter whether you're male, female, non-binary. Fundamentally, the skills needed for inclusive leadership are the same. So the skills that I teach more than anything else, culture intelligence, so understanding other people, getting to understand the nuances, what makes it different, what the challenges are, what the barriers are, and funnily enough, movies for me a good way of doing that. But I give out resources to my clients which use every single medium. Everyone has completely different learning styles. Empathy, so really understanding what it looks like to be empathetic. Vulnerability, so that ability to take off that armor that we're often taught to do and open ourselves up. Becoming an agent of change, so understanding what that means, what that entails, that might have some resilience. And the one that I'll probably put much more towards men, and certainly from my experience of coaching men, and certainly my experience of just knowing men, is the one that I've added in the last 3 months actually, is self-awareness. My experience, male leaders are really not that self-aware. And through becoming more self-aware, you're going to become a far more inclusive leader and actually a much better leader.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Daniela.
Pleasure.
Fabulous. I have a quote.
Awesome.
So I'm going to doctor it a bit because it didn't come with anybody's name to it, but I think it makes sense because listening to Daniela during the conversation and not using the word celebrating but marking, that's the first one I'm going to change. In fact, it's the only one I'm going to change. But the quote I found was, marking International Men's Day with a salute to the men who balance strength with sensitivity, ambition with humility, and courage with compassion. Your example paves the way to progress.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Daniela. Really appreciate you taking the time. It's been fascinating, really, really great. And certainly, hopefully, when people listen to the podcast, there'll be more people who will be sharing the types of posts that you are putting out there and making men more aware of the spaces that there are to be vulnerable and for women to show compassion.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. All the resources mentioned are on our website and Spotify page, where you can read, listen, watch, and dig a little deeper at your leisure. And that, my friends, is a wrap. We've hit the first anniversary, 53 episodes done in total, after Bridget's wibbling and quibbling during the anniversary show, and the end of season 4. We so loved hearing back from our listeners that we've found more to hand the mic to during our Christmas break. So whether you're stuffing the turkey, hiding from the in-laws, escaping to the sun, or whatever else you have planned between now and 2025, come and have a listen to more of our stalwart podders, their favourite episodes and what they are learning. And we will see you back under our headphones on the 7th of January. Bye for now.